message to all black communities. Worldwide. Recently, we have witnessed heated arguments on social media between Africans and African Americans, accusations, insults, and division. Let us be clear, this conflict is not born from our people, but from manipulation designed to weaken us. Here is the truth. Africa is the most resource-rich continent in the world. For centuries, powerful nations have exploited Africa, stealing its resources, destabilizing its governments, and introducing division to keep control. Today, those same strategies continue through misinformation, disease, terrorism, and psychological warfare. A few months ago, even a US AFRICOM general, himself a black American, made false accusations against President Ibrahim Traoré, claims designed to delegitimize African leadership and unity. These tactics are not new. They are part of a larger plan to ensure black people never stand together in strength. But something happened that shook the system. For the first time in a long time, Africans, African Americans, Caribbeans, and black people across the world raised one voice, protesting together, continent to continent, village to city. That unity terrified those who benefit from our division. And now, we see new attempts to sow distrust among us. Do not fall into the trap. This so-called social media war between Africans and African Americans is manufactured. It is not real. It is designed to keep us distracted from our true power. My call to action: stand together as one people, across borders. Refuse to insult, attack, or disrespect each other. Recognize the manipulation for what it is. Focus on our collective liberation, our shared future, and our global strength. We are one people. We are stronger united. The world fears nothing more than a united black voice. Do not give them what they want, division. Unity is our greatest weapon.
They didn't just kill him. They cut off his head and kept it in a jar for 170 years. His name was King Vodou Bonsu II, ruler of the Ahanta people in what is now Ghana. In 1838, he defied Dutch colonial rule. He refused to surrender his land, his people, or his dignity. For that resistance, the Dutch executed him. But killing him wasn't enough. After his death, they cut off his head and carried it across the ocean like a war trophy. Thousands of miles from his kingdom, his head was placed in a jar inside a European medical museum. For nearly 2 centuries, his people mourned without ever knowing what happened to their king's remains. His head sat on a shelf, not as the symbol of a ruler, but as an object of curiosity. Generations of Europeans walked past, staring at him like he was nothing more than a specimen in glass. This is what colonizers called civilization. But tell me, what is civilized about severing the head of an African king and displaying it for 170 years? And then, finally, justice spoke. In 2009, after years of pressure, King Vodou Bonsu II's head was returned to Ghana. His people buried him with the honor he was denied in death. But the scars of that humiliation, the centuries of silence, can never be erased. This was not just about one king. It was about an entire continent deliberately dehumanized. If this story moved you, don't scroll past. Share it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And follow NOIVD for more of the African history they tried to erase.
No hay nadie abajo. Este es uno de los videos más debatidos. Quédate hasta el final para que veas cómo lo hacen, pero detalla bien la parte donde la señora pasa y luego se ve.
Honor and respect, honor and respect, honor and respect. Divine all blessed greetings and salutations. It is another edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo, Secrets and Recipes. Powered, produced, promoted, sponsored, and supported by NOIVD, New Orleans International Voodoo Day. Inspired by National Voodoo Day in Benin and led by the Black community members here in New Orleans, New Orleans International Voodoo Day is a day of collective remembrance and spiritual reparation that is preceded by a symposium and includes a procession to the monuments at the sites of slavery in New Orleans, ritual to account for and seek absolution for the city and the country's participation in the institution of slavery, and homage to those ancestors who suffered through and survived the transatlantic slave trade, and honor and appreciation for the achievements of those who came out of this oppression. 2 days of education, creative expression, elevation, cultural exchange, and above all, healing. May 23rd and 24th, 2026. Through authentic voodoo traditions handed down through generations, we offer a path to healing from the ongoing ramifications of slavery and racism in the United States. And we certainly continue to invite you to come and join us and be a part of the conversation at 9 p.m. Monday through Friday, weeknights at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time on a social media platform near you, or by way of accessing this YouTube channel or the URL link anywhere we might share it throughout the social media universe. And I'm thankful for those who continue to show up and participate and support by way of our live chat. Greetings and salutations, Neophyte Bokor. Ray Alexander, greetings and salutations to you and yours. Jeanette Clark, greetings, beloved, to you and yours. And certainly to the Mambo, Asagwe, Sally Ann Glassman. Thank you so much for continuing to support and be present here with us. I will unmute my beloved co-host, Joshua Nylan Tanner, my armor bearer and first priest for Black Hawk Voodoo Wildman, Queen Mother Sister Toni Val Martinez, our beloved Elder Reggie, known on this platform as Green Soap, leader and founder of Shrine of the White Cloth and team member of NOIVD. Joshua Nylan Tanner is also a team member of NOIVD. And our beloved Bianca Johnson Plessy is also a member of our NOIVD as well as our community member. And thank you so much for being a panelist here tonight. Just before I unmute you all's mics, we've been discussing the effects of the Nat Turner slave revolt on the health and welfare of 19th century slaves in Southern Virginia and ultimately throughout the South. On the genetic side, different populations have different growth rates. And this fact, however, should not affect this study we've been exploring significantly for two reasons. Firstly, this study is based on a single population, that of Southeastern Virginia. And secondly, while the Commonwealth of Virginia did report significant amounts of genetic admixture between whites and blacks, the short-term period of the study should add to the genetic stability. Additionally, studies by Ashcroft and Lovell, published in 1964, and Ashcroft et al., published in 1966, among white, Black, and African high socioeconomic status children in a Jamaican public school found that there were no significant differences in height due to their backgrounds. The population being studied for this project was also stable in that there were not slaves coming into the state. The state's first laws after independence were to outlaw the importation of new slaves to the state, and Virginia was a net exporter of enslaved Africans. So I want to, just for a moment, today most Americans associate slavery with plantations. And yet, during the antebellum era, slavery was practiced elsewhere in the South, including the cities. Urban enslaved people represented between 5 and 10% of the overall enslaved population in the United States. Compared to their rural counterparts, they encountered starkly different working conditions, living standards, and mechanisms of racial control. So here in Louisiana, urban slavery was virtually synonymous with New Orleans, home to more than 23,000 enslaved people by 1840, nearly one-fourth of the city's overall population. And throughout most of the antebellum period, New Orleans was also the Deep South's largest and wealthiest city, the second most active immigration port of entry in the United States, and the fourth busiest commercial port in the entire world. And beyond New Orleans, Louisiana was overwhelmingly rural. Only three other communities boasted more than 5,000 inhabitants in 1860. That would be Baton Rouge, Jefferson City, and Algiers. The latter two cities were annexed by New Orleans in 1870. And although antebellum slavery was predominantly a rural institution, cities played essential roles within the broader plantation economy. Cities where cities were linchpins of the domestic slave trade. During the antebellum era, an estimated 135,000 people were brought and sold in New Orleans slave markets, which was the nation's largest. Cities were also where the cash crops produced by enslaved peoples on plantations were repackaged, sold, and moved into vessels for transport to domestic and overseas markets. Cities were vital financial centers where banks loaned money for the purchase of plantation and peoples. Indeed, so much frenetic financing occurred in New Orleans that from 1835 to 1842, the city's banking capital exceeded that of New York City. And although many may think of plantation slavery as antithetical to cities, cities and slave plantations were economically intertwined and codependent. So, continuing our conversation about labor, and particularly urban labor, when we think about New Orleans, most urban enslaved people were domestic slaves assigned to labor within the households of their enslavers. These enslaved peoples performed innumerable tasks for their enslavers, cleaning their homes, tending their gardens, purchasing their groceries, preparing and serving their meals, washing and mending the clothes, and rearing their children. Middle class and wealthy white people saw service work as demeaning because that labor was so closely associated with the enslaved, and only the poorest households did not hold at least one enslaved domestic worker. Enslaved domestics were so ubiquitous to New Orleans that it was rare to see any white people in the city's marketplaces, according to one resident, because almost the whole of the purchasing and selling of edible articles for domestic consumption was performed by enslaved people. Domestic labor was disproportionately assigned to women, resulting in screwing sex ratios within the cities. In antebellum New Orleans, nearly two-thirds of all enslaved people were women. Enslaved men typically performed heavy menial labor around town, particularly as dock workers and construction workers. New Orleans' antebellum economy was dominated by the city's port, and many enslaved men worked the docks by loading and unloading cargo, stocking warehouses, and repairing ships in dry dock. Often these enslaved dockhands worked alongside foreign-born immigrants, native-born white people, and free men of color. Enslaved men also crewed urban construction sites. They paved streets, dug sewers, laid pipe, and built levees and wharfs. In New Orleans and Baton Rouge, essential public infrastructure was primarily built by chain gangs of imprisoned enslaved people taken from the city's slave jails. Cities were also home to enslaved skilled artisans such as carpenters, weavers, plasterers, shoemakers, blacksmiths, tailors, and bricklayers. Highly valued by their enslavers and the communities, these skilled workers usually employed or enjoyed privileges and levels of autonomy unavailable to most other enslaved people. Typically, they were subjugated to less daily supervision and physical violence. Often, they were able to collect some spending money, either by performing their trade after hours or because their enslavers permitted them to keep a portion of the wages that they subsequently did earn. Factories and businesses also employ enslaved people. Indeed, most of the largest slaveholders in antebellum New Orleans were corporations. The New Orleans Levee steam cotton press, where cotton was compacted into bales for shipping, claimed ownership of 104 people in 1850. The Daquan Brothers Bakery held 47 enslaved bakers, confectioners, and pastry chefs. The New Orleans Gas Light Company, which operated the city's gas lines and street lamps, claimed 35 enslaved technicians, repairmen, and lamplighters. There were even a handful of enslaved skilled professionals in New Orleans. At least one enslaved dentist, Charles Johnson, lived in the city and drew enough business that a group of frustrated white dentists petitioned for his arrest in 1860. An out-of-town visitor to one New Orleans bookstore was surprised to find that the principal clerk was an enslaved man who knew all the current literature. In short, urban slave people were engaged in virtually every employment and industry, whereas rural enslaved people tend to live in cabins apart from the main house. Most urban enslaved people lived in house close proximity to the owners. And due to the risk of fire, antebellum townhouses usually had freestanding kitchens detached from the main residences, and apartments for enslaved people were often located on the second story of the rear structure. Space was always at the premium in cities, and many urban enslaved people were also crammed into attics, closets, foyers, stables, and hallways. A guest at one prominent New Orleans hotel complained that the waiters, who were also enslaved, had no beds and slept like dogs in the passages of the house. Urban architects evolved in response to slavery's demands. Townhouses tended to be flanked with unusually high walls designed to curtail contact between domestic enslaved workers and the outside world. Southern cities also tended to have relatively few alleyways to limit the number of spaces where enslaved people could congregate without surveillance. And as I draw to a close just for today, the hiring out system, though not unique to urban areas, was widely practiced in cities and had considerable impact upon the contours of urban life living, and particularly urban slave life living. Under this system, slaveholders were more considerable impact upon the, I'm sorry, under this system, slaveholders with more enslaved people then they could profitably employ within their own businesses and homes, could rent their surplus enslaved workers to short-handed employers. The practice allowed urban slaveholders to maximize their profits by constantly reallocating their labor supply and according to fluctuating demand. The hiring out system greatly alarmed slaveholders and city leaders who feared that it undermined racial control by weakening the relationship between enslaved people and their enslavers. Every slaveholding city tried regulating the practice by requiring that slaveholders register their enslaved hirelings with the city government and furnish them with special brass badges to be worn at all times. New Orleans went one step further by establishing special government regulated depots along the levees for employers to obtain duly registered hirelings. In practice, New Orleans and Baton Rouge slaveholders habitually ignored these cumbersome regulations. Lawmakers were even more alarmed by the practice of self hiring. Under this arrangement, enslaved people obtained their owner's permission to negotiate their own wages and to rent their own housing, living, and working in near total autonomy on the condition that they periodically return weekly, monthly, or even as rarely as semi annually to deliver a portion of their earnings to their owner. Technically, slave self hiring was illegal, though the laws prohibiting it were inconsistently enforced. Pro slavery critics of the practice railed that self hired slaves were virtually free and a great social evil. They enjoyed a species of quasi freedom decreed or decried by New Orleans Daily Picayune. They were a mongrel class of the Black population, neither free nor bondmen, and on very rare occasion, hired out and self-hired enslaved people were able to save enough money to purchase their freedom. For example, Louisiana's first lieutenant governor, Oscar James Dunn, became free when his father, an enslaved carpenter, purchased freedom for himself and his family, resulting growth of Louisiana's free Black population alarmed state lawmakers who repeatedly drafted legislation aimed at curbing slave manumission. Manumission was severely restricted after 1830 and outlawed altogether in 1857. And on tomorrow night, we're going to discuss social and cultural life in the cities, particularly here in New Orleans, including voodoo, second lines, Mardi Gras Indians, and jazz, and of course, the assemblies of Congo Square. Greetings and salutations to my beloved co-host, my armor bearer, right-hand man, wild man for Black Hawk Voodoo, team member for NOIVD, as well as a faithful member of the Source, Joshua Nylan Tanner, beloved sister wife, Toni Val, Queen Mother, Toni Val Martinez, Elder Reggie, known on this platform as Green Soap, leader and founder of Shrine of the White Cloth, and our beloved team member, community member of the Source and NOIVD, Bianca Johnson Plessy. Greetings, beloveds. Please do come on in, unmute your mics, and join the conversation.
Good evening, everyone. Everyone in the listening area, honored panelists. I was thinking about all of that hiring out. It must have been really hard for a white person to get a job in the city of New Orleans. Say like a white Irishman or white Italian that come over on a boat and really don't have connections and just looking for a job to set him up. It must have was really hard for them to find a job with all the slaves going on in the city. And, you know, the one where the slave was basically hires himself out and is gone from his master, quote unquote, for weeks and even months at a time. I was sitting here when you was reading that thinking to myself, I bet you those were the slaves that were owned by their own family members who bought their family members to get them away from cruel masters who were free and bought them, and then they let them live as freely as they could, but they still had a name to go to. They weren't free people of color, but they were. And I think that's why the city kind of really looked down on them, because they knew what was going on. They knew that their masters were family members who purchased them, say, out of rural slavery or anywhere, and brought them all together under it, because we did have a lot of slave families that owned slaves. We had a lot of women that were kept by rich Frenchmen in the quarter that had slaves themselves to tend to them in a household. New Orleans was a very complex area when it came to who was who and the hierarchy of how things and people were rated in this city. It was to me right now, if it was going on, that would be too much for me. But I guess if you born into that system, you know it like you know the back of your hand. But just thinking about it gives me a headache. What say you, Sister Bianca? How are you? What say you, Sister Bianca?
Hi, how are you? I'm doing good.
That's good. What you think about the free slaves and working themselves, getting the money released out?
Well, what I think about, I think like with that topic, it's kind of tricky because I'm not for sure about my background, but I do remember my grandmother telling me something about our family background where I'm not for sure what our original name was, but I know she said that with the Johnsons, we had took that name from a one of the white slave masters, and they gave us that Johnson name. And I remember she told me that kind of what you're talking about, like some of our own people had owned slaves themselves, like in within the family and stuff. So to me, I feel like it's kind of weird and funny because it's like, okay, well, we were slaves, but then we also had family members that own some of us as slaves, and then we eventually still had the freedom, but we still were slaves at the same time to someone else that's potentially our family.
Yes, in New Orleans, it really was a peculiar institution. And one of the most hired out and sought after workers were the wrought iron workers in the city, and also on a lot of plantations, the wrought iron workers. And the wrought iron workers were clever because a lot of them incorporated into their wrought iron railings African symbols, such as the Indicra symbols. You can walk around the city and see a lot of iron, wrought iron with the Indicra symbols worked into the railings. And I thought that was one way of resisting and fighting back
Mhm.
by them. But they were highly paid and highly sought after. What say you, Brother Joshua?
Good evening, everybody. Sister Toni, Bianca, Elder Reggie, and Divine Prince. Yeah, it's a very peculiar thing. My family's originally from here, and there's tons of stories of tons of history of work and the labor that was done in the city by our ancestors, and how it was done. Um, Thinking about it, it made me think about Katrina for a second, like the levees, when we was talking about the levee systems and stuff. A lot of that stuff was made and was put in place by us, our ancestors, to protect the city. And we really got to see how vulnerable the city was to the water that's around it. Um, that these men that created these levee systems and knew how to keep water out of a city that was sinking and still sinking. Um, it's a level of genius.
Yes, it is. Yes, it really, really is.
Yeah. So
Hey,
like,
Elder Reggie, what's on your mind tonight about the subject?
Thank you, Sister Toni. Divine Prince always come up with great topic and things to talk about. Sister Bianca, if I'm pronouncing it right, welcome. Brother Joshua, welcome. And the collective audience, welcome. Well, the way I see it, part of our procession on National Voodoo Day for New Orleans, we walk down Esplanade. And at Esplanade and Charter, there's a marker. And that marker represents the domestic slave trade. And so after 1808, when the international slave trade is abolished in the United States, they moved into what was called the domestic slave trade. New Orleans becomes the hub of the domestic slave trade. Over 1 million African bodies was sold in the city of New Orleans from 1808 to 1860. That's a lot of people. So what happened was almost everything in the French quarters was used as a slave pen. Slaves was just overwhelmed everywhere. So when you talk of urban slavery in the city of New Orleans, some of these plantation owners and masters had some of their slaves that they hired out until they was able to get some of them out to other plantations, out to Natchez, Mississippi, and beyond, sold. And that's how the New Orleans urban slavery system worked. But what happened when you hear of some of the slaves being enslaved by family members, because free people of color, white Europeans, they would all go to the slave auction block and buy people. So if I'm a young man of age 25 and I buy a female slave of 19, I marry her, have kids with her, but because she was a slave, those kids are under bondage. That's just the way the law was. So now if I'm working as a planner, a bricklayer, or iron worker, I'm gonna free my kids. It's not like people of color, two of them meeting and having a child, and that child is born into slavery. That's why when we think of Mother Marie Laveau, who was born in, let's say, 1800 or 1801, she was never a slave, not born into slavery. And so that is kind of misleading when we say freeing of our family like that, because you got to remember, how did it become family? They married a person who was in bondage. And that's how that happened. But once again, with that domestic slave trade in New Orleans being the hub of it, so much money was being made in this city, turning over so fast, and they had all these black bodies, and they just didn't know what to do with it. So some of them hired themselves out until their so-called master at that time was able to place them somewhere. It's just a horrendous system. I studied this stuff ad nauseum. And the more I studied and I see, this was not a pretty picture, and we really can't paint one around this. That's my opinion.
The best version I've seen for anyone who is trying to understand the complexities of slavery in the South, it's a book called Feast of All Saints, by Anne Rice, and
Mhm.
also a movie by the same name. But the book is already, always better than the movie, but the movie was really good. It's Feast of All Saints, and it takes you from the plantation relationship, the child going to being sent to Paris to be educated. It takes you in the French Quarter and the surrounding area with the free blacks and the enslaved blacks side by side. And it really easily makes you understand and give you a look at how the slave system worked, say in New Orleans, in Baton Rouge, in Jefferson County, the major cities in the South. I
And
really learned a lot from watching that. Well, from reading the book at first. I read the book. It's a rather thick book because it has to cover a lot of grounds.
you got to think about the slave system and also the legal system that kept people of color out of certain avenues and certain things too. So that's a layered thing. That's on top of the slavery system. Like you say about the free people of color with the slaves, we mingled. We was there with each other throughout all this and suffered different type of levels of I guess you could say oppression, legal oppression, and legal restriction because not just because we were those who was enslaved and also for those just who was of color.
Yes.
Joshua, how did you get free people of color? We just got to be real. It's classism, colorism, all that came into play. So if a woman of, let's say, of a shade marry a white man and that child come out more light skinned, then let's say the slave owner took favor of that child and he sent that child to France or whatever. They wasn't doing this for all their kids. Some of this was based on the skin complexion of that kid from that concubine. And they
Oh, I know
started
that.
drawing favors because just like in Haiti, these white European men was not that plentiful to garner and watch over everybody. They had to build a trustee system. And some of them felt like through their own
Yeah,
bloodline mating with concubines that they show favor to handle the system for them. At the
yeah,
time of the Civil War, the top slave owner in the state of Louisiana was a free man of color, and he was
yeah.
considered black after the Civil War. But how was this? But when you study his history, you'll see that his foreparents was European that made it with a
That's
concubine and trusted him with the system. That's how all this stuff happened.
you're right. You're right. And that's a whole nother layer. Like the fact that he, that's just that's how things were done. Because I think that during that time, if I'm not mistaken, the
Yes.
census enumerators were actually, or the people that took down stats of people and classified people based on whatever they wanted to do. Basically, they did it that way. They were just like, okay, you look like you're gonna be this. You're black. You're white. Like I got my family's mixed up. I got family from India, from Sri Lanka that was labeled as black or African American or whatever you want to call it. And they're from India. But they have just because of their complexion and what they look like, just told I mean, I forgot what it was that came out of Virginia that some type of act that enforced or restricted um people from specifically classifying themselves, and it was just black and white. It became mulatto went away, uh, that terminology went away, Creole went away. All those terminologies that people utilized to,
Octoroons,
uh,
quadroons.
yeah, all those things went away at a certain point, and all those people was classified was pushed into black.
Yeah, Brother Joshua, just to add on to what you're saying, that was Walter Plecker, and that was really for the Virginia Tidewater area. Walter Plecker, what he came out with did not affect Louisiana at all. If you study that, and you'll see those terminologies and the words and the titles that he used, that did not affect deep Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and places like that. That's all I wanted to say. And it only affected Virginia. That was not a national decree or a national implement of changing people names and things of that nature. That's very important to realize that.
Well, I've looked at the census records and I could see a difference across the states, not just Virginia, when it comes down to that. After that, going into after the 1870 census or 1880 census, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, that census is
the last census, right? It was 1870 census when they start putting, let's just say, slaves on it, which they changed the name from slave to Negro.
Yeah. So that kept. How can I say this? In terms of that marginalizes the people. When you do that, though, it marginalizes all people of all people really in the country. But it marginalized us more so because of the fact that we wasn't able to properly classify ourselves, and with not stating who you are and actually being specific about that devalues who you are, and that puts you into a whole different class, which is whatever class that they choose to put you in, which is a misnomer.
I'm pushing back against that. You say it's devaluing because the Negro is the lowest class. So if you of anything and you declare to Negro, now it's degraded. And some of this type stuff, it really irks me because as an African, I feel I'm an African and an African American. We are the stepping stone. And okay, people want to take themselves and erase themselves away from their degradation, then that's fine. Maybe America messed up when they classified non-whites as basically Negroes on the census. But people are fighting against that because they don't want to be a part of this Negro experience. But some of us don't have that choice. We have to embrace it and we just have to move forward with it. But it's not an easy pill to swallow because some of these people are keep saying kin folks ain't kin folks. Wait, how does this go? Kin folks, skin folks ain't kin folks. But what do that really mean when we all at a time is trying to fight a major system? And this thing is ugly, man. And when you really peel the layers back of this, and even in 2025, it's still a problem because of the advent of the internet, and it's just horrendous. That's why I kind of appreciate some of the forward things that Divine Prince show on this show. Even though they're on TikTok and it's snippets, it is really trying to lay a foundation that all of us are God children, that all of us has equal value. Yet there's people who want to erase Black man out of the system altogether.
Yeah, they've been doing that ever since we've been freed. Once they couldn't work us for free, they really felt they had no need for us. And to this day, to me, we have not shown them properly the power we do have economically and physically. I've been calling for years. If every Black person working called off the job for one day, it'll be some chaos.
Yes,
it'll be some really chaos. And also the saying, all skin folks ain't kin folks, is not meaning culture-wise or Blackness, is meaning that every Black person is not working with you, is not your friend. You got a lot of them that's gonna side with Massa, like we saw in the movie The Django. A lot of them traitors, like the ones who ratted on Nat Turner and ratted out every other move that we tried to get started, movement and revolt, it was always, always another black in our company that
Yeah,
turned us into the white man. That's what all skin folks and kin folks mean. It
yeah,
don't
it's not
mean
about
they
the butcher.
bloodline. It means don't trust every black just because they black.
You got to follow
Mm.
through. Demonstration. You totally right, Tony Val, and that's definitely what that means. And all I can say is that we are a world people. Us and people here of New Orleans. We know, as Divine Prince mentioned, this is the fourth. At that time, it was the fourth ranked port in the world for trade. It's always been a trade port, even before this American colonial time came through here. That was a river system that ancient. And all I can say is that we have to, and I think that what I'm trying to convey in terms of what they tried to do in terms of classifying us, that is just a mechanism that they utilize to limit our mobility. And what we are the most mobile people on earth. You can look at physically, intellectually,
Mm-hmm.
culturally, creative, and the creative element through arts. So all I'm saying is that we have to understand that in a way where we can move forward, not just in one direction, but in all the directions that we need to move forward in. Because there's multiple directions that we need to move forward in, I feel.
Mm. Good.
Well,
Mm.
everyone, our time has come to an end once again. And I want to turn it over to Elder Reggie to close us out. It's been so glad having you all here with us,
Mhm.
sharing this conversation. Once again, as the easiest way I've seen to even halfway understand the slave system of the South is by reading the book Feast of All Saints, or at least seeing the movie. The movie was really dramatic.
Mm.
Is that the
Yeah.
one by Anna Reese?
Anne Rice, yes.
Okay, gotcha.
By Anne Rice, yes. And an interesting thing is they also did a book off of her interview with a vampire, which not the movie, but the series gives us a look at New Orleans in the early 1900s, the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And for what I read in history, they did a very, very good job of portraying it. They even portrayed when they burned down the black red light district. You know, a lot of stuff don't tell you about the different red light districts they had, and the music houses and the whole houses they had, and how even
Mhm.
they were colorized by the women they had, which ones was the best one. So if you want to watch the first season of the series, which I might add Divine Prince is in, is in that already. And the first season is really in the city of New Orleans, and you get a real good look at the mulattoes, the quadroons, the octoroons. Slavery is over, and it's just city life basically, and what it
Mhm.
evolved to after slavery ended. So, Elder
Mhm.
Reggie, go ahead and
Yeah.
leave us out.
Thank you, Sister Toni. Divine Prince, always a great topic, great show. Brother Joshua, I love your wisdom. And I like, we just debate, man, and it's a good thing. And Sister Bianca, please continue to come because we are learning and we are moving as a unit for New Orleans International Voodoo Day and trying to build a foundation on what this voodoo is and what the city of New Orleans is trying to offer to the community at large. But what I like to speak on is our next new moon ritual prayer and application ceremony. It is on Sunday, September the 21st. That's this Sunday coming. It's at 6:30 p.m. and that location is 710 Cluid Street. It's called the Cluid Gardens. This is a ritual of spiritual warfare and gathering. Those in the local area, or if you're close by, if you can attend, please do. With that, I say, lest we forget, the spiritual medicine of voodoo brings healing and relief from the shackles of slavery that binds the master and the slave to the same chain of social division. We have work to do, brothers and sisters. With that, I say, Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. We love you all. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Please, allow me to show you something.
They say I'm crazy and that might be true. I got this white in my DNA, yet I'm coming for you. It's time we turn the table, strip these motherfuckers on you. I wanna see you hanging from trees. It's time you pay for your dirt and your showtime. You created the monster, you created the beast. Now all this savagery you just gon' reap. I'm coming home, daddy, to the plantation, and I'm taking the lives of everybody, including the children, on some Nat Turner. Oh, do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. I met my girl Harriet at the gate. If you wanna know how she doing, yeah, she's straight. But she had one question: when we gon' get up? All that talking tough, yeah, we don't walk it tough. She got it locked and loaded, got that piece up on her side. She looked me in my eyes and said, "Meet you ready to ride?" Moving forward, you gotta use both eyes. Watch your front and watch your back. Keep your hands up on your gas. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. He sit at the table, but he don't order no bacon. He greet me in those words, Assalamu alaikum. Got them glasses on his face and them waves in his head. He go by the name of Detroit Red. He looks me in my eye and says you only get one try. Know that your biggest opposition will come from the inside. I know you wanna love them all, but don't even try, because they'll smile up in your face while plotting your demise. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down. Do you hear that sound? It's about to go down. Unleash the beast, we about to tear this motherfucker down.